All right, everyone, I will start things off. My computer says it's 6:05. So with that, I will start with my announcements. So welcome, everyone, to our third meeting of the semester. And it's going to be an exciting one. This weekend, we have a few opportunities for you guys. So first off, this Saturday at 10 a.m., going to try to have another social distance hike at Running Deer Natural Area. If you don't know where that is, that's on Prospect. It's on the south side across from Riverbend Ponds, and it borders Arapahoe Bend and the Environmental Learning Center. It's a super neat area. It has the poudre that lines around it. It's super neat. Personally, I'm hoping to see a few herps out just because we are getting a really warm week compared to normal. And so yeah, you do what you got. So yeah, this Sunday we also have our Raptor Monitoring, which, for those of you who aren't super familiar with it, we meet at 9:45 in the forestry lot on campus, leave at 10. We head to Boyd Lake State Park, and we Raptor monitors at 5 different zones within the park. And don't need any birding experience in the past, participate. I'm sending that link right now to the chat. So those of it's first come, first serve. We have a limit of 10 people and 4 cars for this. And so yeah, if you're interested, please sign up. And then last thing I have for now is we have our t-shirt contest. Those of you who have been following our social media and our emails, we're trying to come up with a new shirt design, and a lot of you have submitted some really awesome designs. And so I am going to post the link here. That's the second link, is the t-shirt contest. And no rush. If there are so many good designs, you can't pick one just yet. You have the next few days to choose which one you really like, hone in on the perfect one, and vote for it. And winner of the contest is going to get a free shirt and acknowledgement. And yeah, some of these designs work good for a pocket and work good for the back of the shirt. So we are probably going to pick 2 of the designs on there. Yeah, so whenever you have a second, go on there and choose your favorite design. With that, I don't have anything left to announce, I'm pretty sure. And I will hand it off to Morgan, who will introduce our speaker for tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Remy. So I'm very excited to introduce my boss, Dr. Jake Ivan, who's a wildlife research scientist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So Jake has a bachelor's and master's degree in wildlife biology, and then he got his PhD in the FWCB department at CSU. So he has some ties to CSU, and he's been with CPW for 11 years now, I think. And his focus is on estimating wildlife population parameters and forest carnivore ecology, conservation, and monitoring. So today he's going to tell us a little bit about his work with the Colorado Canada lynx population. So I will hand it off to you, Jake.
All right, are we up?
Yep.
Everyone see and hear me? Cool. Well, thanks for the introduction, Morgan, and for the invitation to be here tonight. Always enjoy talking with students and student groups, and really enjoy talking about lynx stuff and the research that we're doing. Especially the lynx reintroduction stuff. That's just kind of a feel-good story, no matter what your perspective is, and it's one of those that just, yeah, it's always fun to talk about, and you don't hear a whole lot negative about it, or at least I don't. So always a good topic. But before I do that, what I thought I would do, what Morgan thought some of you guys might appreciate, is to give you a few slides of just my background and how I got to where I am, in case that's useful for anybody to hear. And I'll end that with a few pieces of advice, and then we'll jump into to the lynx stuff. So with that, when I was in your shoes working on a bachelor's in wildlife science, I was attending Purdue University. For those of you who don't know, that's That's about halfway between Indianapolis, Indiana, and Chicago, Illinois. So it's out in the middle of just nothing but flat cornfields. It's a great school. It's a great department. There's absolutely nothing to do recreation-wise, so it's a good place to study and learn, I thought. But anyway, did the same things you're doing. I was part of the student chapter of the Wildlife Society, working for a professor part-time, doing wildlife stuff in my years through school, trying to find tech jobs in the summer. And had a little, was fortunate enough to have a little sort of undergraduate research project of my own here, looking at selection of mass species by the granivorous rodents of this area. So finished that up in 1997 and was fortunate to jump directly into a master's program at the University of Montana, working on these guys' American marten stuff. This was just as occupancy estimation was getting started, and the project here was looking at ways to detect marten non-invasively. The study area for this was all up and down the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness between Montana or between Missoula and Hamilton, if you know where those two places are in western Montana. So straight out of there, I took a job as a piping plover recovery biologist with the Nature Conservancy. It was actually a joint position. Nature Conservancy paid half my salary. Fish and Wildlife Service paid the other half. This was a term job. Sort of took me back to, I worked several summer jobs in the Dakotas as an undergraduate, and I think that's part of the reason I was able to get this coming out of graduate school. Change of pace, certainly totally different than the marten stuff. I had worked on songbird stuff in the past, but never shorebird stuff. So piping plover is a little endangered shorebird. Lives in these very alkaline wetlands along the Missouri Coteau. So the study area for this was 8 counties, northeast Montana down into central North Dakota, which in any given year houses the vast majority of the world's population of the species. So totally fun job, totally cool place to live and work. You know, if it wasn't a term thing, if it was permanent, I may even still be there, who knows. But it was a term thing. As the term was ending, I took a different job, this time as a refuge biologist with the Fish and Wildlife Service in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Again, this was a term thing, a 3-year term. It was an awesome job. The service was in the process of acquiring a bunch of islands in Lake Michigan, the mouth of Green Bay, from the Coast Guard. And my job was to go around to these islands and do biological inventories. So I literally just spent summers driving around on a boat, camping on islands, and doing bird surveys and herb surveys and plant surveys and mammal surveys and that kind of thing. It was, again, great job. If it wasn't a term, I might still be there. But one thing that I noticed and was starting to gnaw at me, both in this particular position and the one before it, is that I was getting into things that I wanted to do and couldn't. So for instance, one of the projects we had going here was a kind of a complex survival analysis for double-crested cormorants. In the previous job, we wanted to look at nest success relative to various covariates, and I found that I couldn't do that stuff myself. I had to rely on other folks to do that, and it kind of bugged me, so I decided to try to go back to school and was able to land a position at CSU in 2005, working on sort of one end of the lynx reintroduction stuff. So that was going great guns when I got on board. I was working on the snowshoe hare end of it. I didn't work much on the lynx end of it at all at that point in time. But my supervisor was the person who had the position I'm in now, and she was the one sort of in charge of all of the lynx reintroduction stuff. And then every once in a while, you just get fortunate, serendipity smiles at you. And as I was finishing up, this position came open. I applied for it, and I got it. So I've been with Parks and Wildlife ever since. Still continuing to work primarily on Canada lynx and snowshoe hare sorts of issues. So, you know, from time to time, I don't know, half a dozen times a year, it seems like undergraduates end up in my office, and you know, one of their questions is always, you know, how do I get your job, or how do I get to here? And my honest answer is, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a great prescription for how to get here. What I would say is take the opportunities that present themselves to you, and don't be afraid to try, something new. If you think you're everyone has goals, and that's great. If you want to work on mammals or some particular system or in some part of the world or the country, that's a great thing to have in mind. But if some opportunity presents itself, and if you think you're a mammal person, but you get to do some songbird work, you might try it, because you never know, you might really like songbird stuff. Or you think you want to stay in the West, but some job presents itself in Florida, you might give it a shot, because you might really like Florida. So that's the one thing I would say is that. And the other thing is, no matter what you do in terms of undergraduate, graduate school, tech positions, whatever, is just give it your level best, no matter what you're doing. You never know how the experiences you have will stack up on a resume and what might turn out to be important in the future. And it's amazing to me how small the wildlife world really is. Okay, so if you take a job and don't really like it and kind of blow off the last half, and then the next job you want to apply for is your dream job, it could very well be that your former boss is best friends from graduate school with the guy you want to work for, or the woman you want to work for. You never know. There's connections like that all over this field. So do a good job no matter what it is that you're working on. So with that, I'll shut up about life advice. That's how I ended up here. It's kind of a circuitous route, but it was fun. I enjoyed all those positions and all those places for sure. So let's get on with it and talk about lynx. I want to start a bit with a little bit of history, because a lot of this reintroduction stuff happened long enough ago. We just passed the 20th anniversary actually last year, that half of you weren't even alive, let alone remember anything about it. And you probably maybe heard about it, living in Colorado, but I wanted to touch on some of that and then jump forward to some current research that we have going on at the moment. So with that, let's start at the very beginning. This is a slide showing historical occurrence of lynx in the lower 48 from 1842 to 1998. So Kevin McKelvey put this together, did the horrible task of going through all the museum specimens, all the trapping records, every last shred of evidence we had about lynx in the lower 48, trying to figure out which things seemed reasonable, which were probably true, which were probably made up, and then plotted the good stuff. And here's where we ended up. And as you can see, there's a number of locations in Colorado. We're at the very southern tip of lynx range, but there's a number of locations there. And that's important because we, in the Division of Wildlife originally, Colorado Parks and Wildlife now, have always considered lynx to be a native species to the state. And not everybody considers them to be native. We can talk about that later if you want, but we always have, and that's important. You'll see in a couple of slides. Let's jump forward to 1997. That seems like a random year, but that's when our agency first decided or was considering this reintroduction idea. In 1997, the status at that point is the species had been listed as state endangered since 1973. As far as we can tell, the main reason for that was probably widespread predator control stuff. So there was a lot of government-sponsored trapping in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There was also just a lot of the ranching community and the mining communities and everybody else just doing this sort of general predator poisoning at that point in time. And this is a species that, even where it's doing well, it's not super abundant, it's not super productive, and we feel like that this widespread control efforts probably just set this thing on a trajectory that they just couldn't pull out of, is our thought of what happened, at least. 1974, the last known lynx was trapped in Colorado. That occurred over by Vail. From 78 until 97, our agency conducted a whole series of surveys across the state to try to figure out if the species was still here or not. And there was some possible evidence, some tracks that looked like they may have been lynx that showed up in a couple of those surveys, but nothing that we could confirm. And also, it was clear that even if lynx were still present, it was really no more than a handful of individuals. So not enough to be considered a viable or stable population by any means. So it was decided in 97 that we should go ahead and do this reintroduction thing. Why did we do it? It actually started in 1999. It took us a few years to get everything planned and get going. The first bullet there is pretty important, and that was that, you know, we have, every agency has mission statements and strategic plans and a bunch of stuff that no one ever really reads or considers. But that sort of sets the stage for, you know, why we're even here as an agency. And one of the first sentences there is to ensure the long-term viability of native fish and wildlife, blah, blah, blah. Again, we considered lynx to be a native species to the state. We also were pretty sure the reason they weren't around anymore is because something that humans did to them, and so it felt sort of like our duty to try to put them back if we could. The second bullet's pretty important. We also felt like the threats that caused their demise were really no longer something we needed to worry about. So the predator control thing had long since been regulated and kind of taken control of. And that's important. I mean, I don't want to reintroduce something if the whole reason that they're probably gone in the first place still exists. You know, it's kind of a waste of everyone's time and effort and money. And then the third bullet is pretty important too, and that is that we thought natural recolonization wasn't all that likely, or it might take a long time. There'd be a lot of waiting for that to happen, just because we're so isolated here. We have a decent amount of lynx habitat in Colorado, but it's pretty disconnected from the next big patch, which is, you know, that Yellowstone area and southwest Montana kind of area. There's a lot of sagebrush in between. Not that lynx can't cross that. You'll see that in a few slides too, but it's unlikely that enough animals would make that trip and then find each other to actually start a population. So we went for it. The primary goal was to establish a self-sustaining and viable population of lynx in the state. Here's sort of the nuts and bolts of kind of how it unfolded, the number of cats that we got from the various places that we got them. In the way that we worked that is we just worked with local trappers in these areas and basically offered them more money for live lynx than they were going to get for the pelts if they sold them on market. That's basically what we did. And they worked out all the arrangements to have, you know, vets look at them to get them to airports and all that kind of thing. So you can see where they all came from. You can see here, year by year, the number we released. One important point is in 99, 2000 is when we first started. We released quite a few cats. And then there's sort of a pause here. We didn't release anything in 2001 or 2, and then it started back up again. And the reason for that is our initial strategy, 99 and 2000, was a hard release strategy. So the thought was, let's minimize the amount of time that these things are in captivity and not in the wild. So let's get them from BC or the Yukon or wherever as quickly as we can to Denver, and then get them out of DIA and into the woods as fast as we can. And it turns out, hindsight being 2020, that didn't work as well as we were hoping. Survival wasn't as high as we wanted. A lot of cats sort of dispersed further than we wanted. We had more than we wanted that appeared to be starving and that kind of thing. So we took the pause and decided beginning in 2003 we would start up again, but do implement a completely different strategy, and that was more of a soft release kind of thing. So we built a bunch of pens down there Del Norte and started bringing in animals and then just holding them there. So they got a lot of, you know, regular veterinary checkups. They got fed and fattened up pretty good. Got used to high elevation, got used to Colorado climate, whatever. And then we released them released all of them at the same time, late winter, early spring, when, you know, things were about to green up, when life was going to get easier, et cetera, et cetera. So the other thing about, you know, the 99, 2000 stuff is you catch an animal in the Yukon in January and you toss it out in Colorado. That's a pretty tough time of year to figure out your new digs and try to, you know, find hares and do your thing. So we started dumping them out here later in the reintroduction at a time of year when life was, you know, hopefully a little bit easier. So 218 total is what we put back into Colorado. We did a lot of research associated with the reintroduction and had a lot of objectives and benchmarks as an agency we were trying to meet. So one of the first things is we wanted to document distribution and make sure that animals were actually staying in Colorado and staying in what we thought was good habitat in Colorado, or just like dispersing and wandering everywhere. We wanted to do the best we could to understand habitat use, movement, and diet in the state in case it was different from lynx in other places, because obviously that's going to be critical in terms of management and conservation, is to understand those processes. And then maybe most importantly, we wanted to estimate survival. We wanted to estimate productivity. And we put those two things together and look at population growth and see how things were progressing. Were we on track towards a viable population, or were we missing that mark? Just a few slides to show you how we met some of these benchmarks and how we measured up to some of these objectives. So this is a map of every single lynx location we ever collected from all the animals that were released into the San Juans. And it's an impressive slide in one sense in that, my gosh, these things can really move. For a 20-pound cat, they can go lots of places. It ended up in places that, we don't consider to be lynx habitat either. I mean, all the way out to Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, up to Montana and Idaho. Many of these cats that went up here actually just made their way back and came all the way back. So that's kind of interesting to look at. The record movement that we documented was this one. Unfortunately, we don't have a path for this animal. It was a male that had actually settled into a home range down by Silverton, and it actually had fathered several litters, and then we just lost it. And that happens. We figured, the collar malfunctioned, collar died, cat died, whatever. And then a few months later, got a call from a trapper in Alberta, said, I got to have this cat on my line, and it's got a collar and it has your name on it. So that thing made it, at least 1,100 miles straight line distance. Certainly it was not a straight line. It'd be interesting to see what path it actually took. The other interesting thing, not to anthropomorphize things too much, is this cat actually came from Alberta, not very far from here. Front was a BC cat, just on the other side, I believe, actually. So whether he was headed home to visit or whatever is hard to say, but pretty incredible movement. But again, that's not what we wanted, right? What we wanted was to document that these animals were staying in Colorado and contributing to the population in Colorado. In actuality, that's what was happening for the most part. So this is a map of the inner 95% of those locations. Okay, so if you create a utilization distribution at a population level and project that, this is what you get. Okay, so everything we're seeing before that is kind of interesting that people talk about in the news or whatever, of cats moving all over, that's kind of cool, but those are outliers is what I'm saying. So this is where the vast majority of these animals settled and where they lived their lives and did their thing. So most of them stayed in the San Juans where we released them. The hotter color here on the red is more lynx, more locations. Several of them, though, did move into the central Siwatch range and establish home ranges up that direction as well. So in terms of distribution, when you consider the majority of the activity that happened, we were pretty happy with that. I don't want to spend too much time on this stuff, but we did, with the collars, measure survival. This is actually mortality curve, plotted against months since release for all of these animals. And again, I don't want to belabor what all these lines are, but you notice that they all sort of start relatively high and then decline pretty rapidly and level off. And what that means is in the first few months or 6 months or even a year or so after you're released, your mortality rate is kind of high. As you're figuring things out, but that drops pretty significantly and levels off once you've made it through the first couple of years of life here in Colorado. And also your survival, the diamonds here, your mortality is lower, so your survival is higher if you stay in the San Juans as opposed to going somewhere else. Productivity, we finally did, after we switched up the release protocols, started to find evidence of productivity in denning. These are very typical lynx dens. So they don't dig a hole or anything like that. They don't find rock crevices generally like bears or anything. What they do is they find the steepest, worst blowdown on north-facing slopes and drop their kittens underneath that. That basically serves as a den. So we found the first one of those in 2003, again, after we had changed up the release protocols. We actually found almost 50 through the end of the reintroduction project in 2010. And through that, we're able to document, because we had all these marked with PID tags and also had the genetics, and we were able to document that 3 generations of kittens had survived and made it and produced their own kittens in Colorado. So we put together the survival stuff, we put together the reproduction information that we had over this basically 10-year period and put together a simple population projection model. This is the output from that. So number of individuals on the y-axis doesn't matter really how many you start with. We just said, what if there's 50 males and 50 females? What happens, when you go out here 20 years? And it turns out you can see that based on the survival we observed and the productivity we observed, that we projected things would be a bit cyclic, move up and down. But the thing that was encouraging is every peak in that cycle, every successive peak was just a little bit higher than the one before. Okay, so what we took from that is we thought we met that overall arching goal of having a viable population. Looked like, as best we could tell, we had a bunch of links in the state and we had put them on a trajectory where the population was at least stable, if not increasing a little bit. So that made us feel pretty good that we had done what we intended to do in terms of the initial reintroduction effort. And so we declared success and had all these press releases in 2010, which is great. The other piece of that, though, is it's hard to know, long term, what the real success of this program is. So we immediately, the day after we declared success, started working on a monitoring program so that we could keep track of this stuff for another couple decades and really make sure that what we thought we had established as a viable population was really viable, and that it would maintain itself for a long time. So going back to this map of sort of links distribution in the state, we focused for now back down in the San Juans, although I would like to expand this to other places. We went back to the San Juans and we laid out a grid where the cell size is the same size as the female lynx home range. So it's 75 square kilometer cells there. And we clipped them all out so that we're only considering the cells that overlap potential lynx habitat. From there, we took a random sample of 50 from among the 100 and whatever cells that are there. Those are the colored ones. And within each of those 50, we go in every year and we do repeat surveys and keep track of the number of lynx detections that we get, detection, non-detection kind of data. Okay, we use snow tracking in the blue colored cells and cameras in the orange colored cells, put all that together in an occupancy model. And what we're really trying to estimate is the proportion of this whole area, the proportion of the San Juans is actually occupied by lynx. And we track that proportion through time as an index of abundance. It would be great if we could just estimate numbers, but that's really hard to do. So we're using this occupancy thing as an index to that. And the idea is if the proportion of the San Juans occupied goes up, that probably means that the population is doing well and increasing in the San Juans. And conversely, if the amount of area occupied goes down, the number of those cells occupied goes down, then that's probably a bad thing. Right, so that's what we're trying to do. We do that annually. This is the stuff actually that Morgan's been working on for us here the last many months. And so what we're hoping from the camera surveys, we get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of photos every year that we have to sort through. We're hoping for photos like this or like this. And then from the track surveys, we're hoping to find, we're hoping to cut tracks like the ones we see on the left there, the typical lynx track, what they look like from the top, from the surface. Although a lot of times in this part of the world, tracks get snowed in, they get blown in, they melt out. It can be difficult to tell what's what. And so I would like to show this to some interesting stuff that I learned when I got here that these tractors have known for a long time, is that when animals walk across the snow, obviously they leave the prints on the surface. We all know that, and we can count digits and look at gates and straddles and try to figure out what it is, but they also compress the snow as they're walking on it. And they often leave a compression signature that's very unique underneath that snow, okay? So you compress the snow and the shape of that, and then the snow that's compressed freezes, and the shape of that frozen little ball underneath there is really indicative of species to species differences as well. So Canada lynx, big feet, basically having their own onboard snowshoes, leave a compression signature like that one on the top right. It's kind of a pan-shaped thing. It's really wide, disc-shaped thing that's about 2 inches deep. And that's because all their weight is just sort of evenly dispersed and it goes kind of sideways. what Doug is showing you down here on the bottom right is the typical compression signature of a coyote. Much smaller track in terms of the area that it takes up, but it goes down into the snow much deeper. And that's because all of their weight is going down rather than out. So anyway, interesting little tidbit that a lot of folks don't know about. There's as much information under the snow as there is on top when it comes to tracking and doing snow surveys. But these are the kinds of things we're looking for. That's not a lynx. The one on top is a lynx. Here's the results of what we've gotten so far. So these are all of the cells that we actually sample. These were the red or the orange and the blue ones from a couple slides ago. The deeper the green, those are cells that we tend to get lynx almost every year. So what this is a number of years out of the last 5 that we've actually detected lynx. And you can see there's some hot spots kind of along the spine of the sand mounds where we always get them. There's some that are lighter green or yellowish where we get them off and on depending on the year. And then there's always gray cells along the fringes where we've never gotten them. In terms of the trend in occupancy, here's what we've gotten. So 2010 is when we did all the research on this. I put that on there for reference. With 14, 15 on up is when we've really done it in terms of a management context and a monitoring context. And it's a relatively flat line with some blips out here in more recent years. I honestly think that's due to changes in lure and changes in snowpack. We've had some crazy winters, as much or more than it is changes in actual lynx occupancy. But we'll keep on doing this for at least a decade or so and see how that sort of turns out across the years. But so far, I think the evidence is kind of like the population projection would indicate, in that they just kind of keep on keeping on. We tend to find them in all the same places we always found them, which is encouraging. We haven't really noticed that they're finding new places, which is a little bit of a bummer, but at least it isn't going down, which is good. All right, so that's all I wanted to say in terms of the general history of lynx and the reintroduction and what we're doing currently in terms of monitoring and that kind of stuff. What I wanted to do is go back and look at some more specific stuff and get into some research we're currently doing right now to really focus in on what's necessary for conservation and management of lynx and hares in the state. So a lot of what we did during the reintroduction, we did a ton of research, and a lot of it was done by tracking lynx. Okay, so the picture on the left here, you follow the snow tracks as far as you can, day after day after day. You can learn a lot about lynx habitat use, how far they travel, how often they kill stuff, what they're killing, where they choose to sleep, all of those kinds of things. We added it all up at the end. Our technicians on snowshoes actually followed lynx the distance equal to going snowshoeing from here to Chicago and back again. So a lot of information tied up in that effort. And one of the things that came out of that is we get a lot of these kind of pictures on the right, which doesn't look like much. This is a typical snowshoe hare kill from a lynx. Cats are finicky and weird in how they kill stuff and how they choose to eat stuff. It varies from prey species to prey species. And hares are very unique in that they tend to eat absolutely everything. They eat the head, they eat the ears, they eat all the guts and the skeleton of the whole thing. What they leave is the hind feet. So you can see there's a hopefully you can see my cursor. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 toes of a big hare foot that's pointing right at you here, and then this is the second hare foot over here. Don't know why they do that, but that's typical of lynx and kind of lynx only when it comes to hares. Okay, and in doing this, we found that about 70% on average of what they eat is these guys, snowshoe hares, which isn't surprising. You guys could have guessed that, and we've all taken an ecology class and seen the classic lynx hare cycles and all that kind of stuff. And it really isn't that much different down here in Colorado than it is further north. It's just there's fewer lynx and fewer hares. About the only other thing that they eat are red squirrels. Okay, so almost all of the remaining portion of the diet is these guys. So clearly 70% is hares. This is sort of where it's at in terms of lynx conservation. A lot of it comes down to hare conservation, but red squirrels are important too, because there are years when there aren't that many hares around, and this is what they turn to sort of get them through those years. And so it's an important alternate food source. Just to give you a sense of how that can vary, this is a table. I don't want to drown you in the details here, but if you focus on this line, this is the average across all of these. Every line is a year. This is the percent of the diet, it's hares and red squirrels, and here's the 70, and here's the 27 that I just showed you. That's the average. But in some years up here, it's 90% snowshoe hares and less than 10% squirrels. And in other years when there aren't many hares around, it's 50-some% hares and 40-something% squirrels. So it can be highly variable, and squirrels can be important in some years, and that has ramifications. Okay, so this is a figure of snowshoe hare density from my dissertation work across, what do we have here, 6 seasons. And clearly you don't have to squint too hard to see that this is kind of a tail end of a cycle here. At the same time I was doing this, my boss and her crews were trying to find lynx dens. And after that first summer, when I documented hare density to be relatively high, they were able to find lots of dens and lots of kittens, which is great. After the second summer of my dissertation stuff, when I noticed a hare density, less than half of what it was before, her crews, using the same amount of effort, the same techniques in the same places, didn't find any dens or any kittens. The next summer, when things were even more bleak from a dense hare density standpoint, again, no dens, again, no kittens. And then the following winter, I noticed that hare density seemed to be coming back up again. And sure enough, when we get out here that following summer, all of a sudden we have lynx dens and lynx kittens again. Now, this is pretty typical of lynx ecology and sort of illustrates how important hares are. When there aren't hares, they switch to squirrels. That's great. They can survive on that. But one of the consequences is productivity just shuts off. Okay, so these 0 years here happen to be years when they were eating lots of squirrels. Those were the 40% squirrel diet things that I showed you in the previous slide. So hares are a big deal when it comes to lynx conservation and lynx management. We also know that hare density is structured quite strongly by what we do to the forest. Okay, so current research we got going is looking at how does what we do to the forest influence hare abundance and density, because we know that hare abundance and density really impacts what happens over here to lynx. To do this, we're using pellet plots and pellet counts. So we know that hare density on the y-axis is very strongly and linearly and tightly related to the number of pellets that you tend to count on average at any given plot in a stand, which is kind of nice. It's easy to count hare pellets, much easier to try to estimate hare density directly. And if you can do that and you trust this line, you get a decent idea of how many hares are in a given stand. And so what we're doing is trying to figure out how hare density changes as a result of various management activities that happen out there on the landscape, and how that changes even through time, and what the Forest Service should expect if they decide to do management activity X on some piece of ground Y. What should they expect hare density to do in the next several decades after they implement that? So this is a piece of ground west of Red Feather Lakes, just up the road from us. You can see it's a pretty highly managed area. And the Forest Service, being the Forest Service, they draw a polygon in a GIS around every activity they do, and they assign that thing a code. Okay, and we got a hold of that stuff. Sort of simplified that world into 4 strata that we think are meaningful for hares. We took all of these codes that are in yellow here and just said, look, these are all, the details differ, but really these result in even age kinds of stands. So we're going to simplify and collapse all that stuff and say this is even. All these codes in kind of gray are some form of thinning. The green stuff is uneven aged management. And then of course there are stands out there that don't have a polygon on them, and those are unmanaged controls. So the design of the study is this. We have the unmanaged, even aged, uneven aged, and thinned across the top. There's our 4 simplified categories of the world. Then we have 2 strata on the left here, lodgepole pine and spruce fir. They're really the only 2 things that are important to hares in Colorado. And then we randomly selected a bunch of replicate stands in each of these bins to go sample using the pellet plots. And we actually subdivided this even further into years that have elapsed since the even age management or the thinning or the uneven age management, etc., and tried to spread out our sampling within those bins. The idea being then is you could go out and sample this stuff. We sample 50 plots in each of these replicates, plot the number of pellets or estimate hair density, and fit some curves through that and see, what is the trend through time after you do one management implementation versus something else. So we're doing that. We're sampling thousands of plots and hundreds of stands across the state, from Wyoming to New Mexico, basically, in the western half of the state. And here's some of the preliminary results. So in an unmanaged control setting, you tend to have about twice the hair density, twice the hair pellets in the spruce fir type of stand as you do in lodgepole pine. And that's not surprising. We sort of knew that going in, that spruce fir is more of where it's at in terms of hair ecology than lodgepole. But what's interesting is in a lodgepole stand, if you manage it, you can potentially make it better, at least for a little while. So for instance, if we take an unmanaged control lodgepole stand and we clear cut it, that's even age stuff, we immediately knock the hair density down to basically 0. They don't like clear cuts. But as those young trees regenerate and grow into really dense dog hair stands, the hairs come back and density increases. And in fact, it goes way up and can actually be double what it was in the control type of stand. Once you get out here too far, 40 years after you clear cut it or so, those stands get decadent, they start to self-thin, and the hair density goes down. So it's ephemeral, but you can produce a lot of hairs in some of these stands. Uneven age lodgepole isn't really a thing. It just doesn't fit with the ecology of that species. And then thinning is a similar sort of pattern, just a little bit flatter. The other interesting thing about thinning is that activity generally occurs on top of even age stuff, okay? So generally the Forest Service likes to thin stands that were even age management once they get into that thick dog hair sort of a state, which is an interesting management conundrum. About the time they get good for hairs is when you would like to thin them from a silvicultural standpoint in order to produce the most timber. So that's always a push and a pull here, and a constant conflict is, do we thin, do we not thin? Where do we allow it? Where don't we allow it? But you can see the impacts to hairs here. With spruce fir, these are sort of the impacts you get from even age, uneven age, and thinning. But the main take home here is you can never really make spruce fir better than the unmanaged control state. So you might want to do stuff to it for timber management, for fire management, for recreation, for water, whatever you want to do. I'm not saying we shouldn't ever do anything in these stands, but if you do, it's probably going to be worse for hairs, not better. Now, some of these treatments, the hair density does approach sort of the control condition at some point in time, but there's a lot of points in time there where it's depressed from that control condition too. So that's what we're finding so far. Interesting relationships here. Hopefully it's useful to the Forest Service so they can, as they're planning what they're going to do in these landscapes, they can have an idea of when it's time to consider hares and lynx. If we do this, this is what we should expect to happen in the next half century, kind of a thing. And that's ongoing right now. I'm actually in the process of just advertising for this, hopefully tomorrow. So if you're interested in driving around Western Colorado and camping and driving and camping and driving and sampling and counting pellets and camping and driving some more, then it's a great job. You can see lots of cool stuff, and you can send me a resume or give me a call. So with that, that's all I really wanted to say for tonight, and happy to answer any questions you might have on any of it, if there are any. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jake Ivan. So we'll give a few minutes for questions, so please go into the chat if you have anything to ask. Unmute yourself if you have anything as well. I did have one question. I saw when you had the percentages of hares and squirrels, what percentage of their diet was taken up by them. 2008 to 2009, it was almost switched to the head where it was 26% hares, and then the rest was squirrels and other. So I was wondering what happened that year to kind of flip everything upside down.
let me go back to, I guess I shouldn't have turned it off. So you're talking about this right here?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, the 2008 and 9. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened there. That's definitely a bit of an outlier. I'm not sure if that's just just noise or what the deal was. We do know anecdotally from other work that we did other places that turned around and came right back up pretty quickly after that. But yeah, I'm not sure. Interesting. Could just be the continued downward cycle of that hair stuff that went into the early winter, but then they started recovering after that too.
Right, sweet. Thank you.
Yep.
So Jake, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more like the debate around the lynx being native or not. That might be interesting.
Yeah, so I presented the evidence for it being native, and that is that we have all of these occurrences that are documented from going back to the middle 1800s. So that would indicate that they've kind of always been here. What's interesting though is if you dig into well, I'll just go back to it. If you dig into those occurrences and plot them against time, what you see is that it's a lot of these are related to the actual lynx cycle further north. And so things peak further north and everything's going great. And then when the hares crash, there's a whole bunch of lynx around, they have nothing to eat. And then the lynx start to crash, but as they do that, they start to disperse too. And so what you see in a lot of these occurrences are pulses that occur right after a high in the lynx population in northern parts of Canada. And then those occurrences diminish a lot of times to nothing until the next pulse. And then you get occurrences again, and then it goes back down to nothing. So it's kind of this ebb and flow from sort of the motherland further north. And so another thought is that a lot of this habitat down here in the lower 48 is okay, and there certainly are hares in it, but it may not be able to sustain lynx very well on its own. It's really this influx periodically from Canada that's fueled all of the stuff we're seeing here. So that's the other side of that coin. Yep. And I don't know how we'll ever know that for sure. I mean, we're set up to monitor lynx for a long time. So I guess if they hang out in Colorado for 50, 60 years, then that's probably evidence that, maybe they were always here at some level. But, if they blink out here in the next decade, then that's probably evidence that, maybe this ebb and flow thing and getting fueled from Canada is really what it was all along. We'll see. We can all place bets.
Awesome. Okay. And then do you want to just briefly explain how you determine the change in snowshoe hare to red squirrel like diet percentage year to year? Like, are you testing the scat, or how do you get that data?
Yeah, that was all just from all that snow tracking stuff. So that's literally, we have all these crews out there tracking every day and keeping track of every bed they find, every road crossing, but also every kill they come across. And it was, so that's the percentage of kills along those tracks. Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, do you want to explain the technician job just a little bit more? I will say that I did it a couple years ago, and which got me started on this other stuff with Jake, and it is the best job ever. You basically just camp and walk around the forest. So I would encourage everyone to apply if that's what you're into.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple job. It's basically she summed it up. We have all these randomly selected stands, and then all these randomly selected plots, 50 plots within each of those stands. And so we just divide the crew up into teams of 2, and you and your partner get a truck and a tent and a cooler and an assignment of places to go. You just take off. So it can be a little bit grueling because it's sort of 8 days on, kind of a hitch, 8-10 hour days in a row. And you're literally just drive, get out, sample, go to the next one, sample, and when it gets dark or you're into the end of the day, you pitch your tent somewhere and camp, and then just keep going and go until the 8 days is up. So that's kind of how it works, but it does get a bit monotonous in terms of you're just kind of counting pellets every day, but it's also kind of fun. You're also, your whole job is just traveling around Western Colorado and hiking through the woods also every day. So if you like camping, if you like traveling and seeing new places, you do get to see a lot of cool stuff because it's all randomly selected stuff. I find that when you do that, you end up in a lot of cool places that you just never would have had any reason to go to otherwise. There's no trail, there's no trailhead, no parking lot, no national park, no whatever, but you end up in some neat places and see some neat things just because that's what got selected on the map. So it runs from June through August, so it works out pretty well with school schedules. And we also in the past have tried to accommodate folks with the Pingree schedule as well. So if you're taking one of the first sessions of Pingree, we'll sort of work with you to start a little later than some of the other crew and jump in and help us out with this stuff. So yeah, let me know if you have any more specific questions about that or anything, or talk to Morgan or shoot me an email or whatever, but that's kind of what it entails. Anything else I left out that's important, Morgan?
No, that pretty much sums it up. I will say the 8 days on, 6 days off is kind of awesome because you work 8 days straight and then you have like a week off to do whatever you want. So I would go visit family or go to weddings, whatever, just have fun for those 6 days. So it's kind of awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I guess I mentioned the 8 days on, but the flip side is the 6 days off. I think is pretty nice. It's like a full week to go do. I've even had technicians fly back to Ohio where they're from and visit their family, do whatever. It's long enough you can actually do something if you really want to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I sent everyone your email in the chat. So yeah, if you guys are interested in that, you can send Jake a message about that.
Send me a quick cover letter and your resume and let me know that you'd be interested in that job, and I'll hopefully you'll see it posted in association with the Pingree stuff and then just around the department here pretty quick too. And I probably will put it on Texas A&M just because I usually do, but lately here I've been kind of giving preference to CSU folks for this job. Yep, especially with the whole COVID thing too. That simplifies life if everyone's a little bit more local. And we have, let's see, 4 or 5 maybe open positions for this year. So there's some opportunity there if you're interested. Anything else? Questions about anything?
Yeah, I actually had a question on your opinion about the wolf reintroduction. I know I should have asked this earlier, but just kind of generally, there's a bunch of stakeholders with, ranchers and everybody like that, but somebody who works from the Western Slope a lot and somebody who works with kind of a mesopredator, do you think they're ready? I guess it's probably the best way I can put it. Do you think they'll even be affected too much because of their different habitats, or what do you think?
Do you think, are the wolves ready? Will that work?
No, the lynx. Yeah, no, the lynx ready for the wolf reintroduction, because
the lynx. Oh, I see. Yeah, I think so. There isn't really much interaction between wolves and lynx in other places. They co-occur all across North America, in Montana and Idaho and all through Canada and Alaska, and they sort of lead separate lives. There certainly are cases where obviously wolves are bigger and more aggressive and live in packs, and so if push came to shove, they would certainly take out a lynx if that opportunity presented itself, and I'm sure that's happened. But for the most part, wolves are in Colorado, expect to be down in lower country. Lynx, because of their adaptations, are pretty high up and really survive in a place where nothing else can make a living. There's a few coyotes up there. There's some martins up there, grouse. That's about it. Ptarmigan, there really isn't much up there, especially in the winter. So I don't expect there to be much conflict or much impact of the wolf reintroduction on lynx. And even from a competitive standpoint, lynx are so focused on hares, and when not eating hares, they're eating squirrels, and those are just things that aren't going to be able to sustain a wolf pack. They're after bigger stuff. So I don't think it'll be a big deal I don't expect there to be much impact at all to lynx. There'll be lots of other impacts for sure on all kinds of other things, wildlife and people and all kinds of stuff for sure, but I think lynx will be not a big deal.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so interrupt me if you do have any lingering questions you want to answer before we're done here. But if that's it, I'd like everyone to thank Mr. Jake Ivan for coming and spending his evening sharing his experience with us and the kind of history and ongoings of the lynx reintroduction. It's really insightful. Highly encourage everyone who does not have any plans for the summer currently to consider his tech position, because those are a great way to get into state agencies or just to get some field experience. So I'd say go for it. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Our next meeting is March 16th. And yeah, hopefully I see some of you guys for Raptor Monitoring this weekend and our social distance hike. And with that, I wish everyone a good night. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Ivan.
Thank you.
Thank you.